I did not expect to see sheriff's deputies shutting down a $5 million marina on a Saturday morning, and I definitely did not expect them to be doing it because of paperwork with my name on it. The sun had barely cleared the trees around Kentucky Lake when the first boat trailers started lining up along the Marina Road. Families carried coolers toward the docks. Retirees rolled in on golf carts. Employees unlocked storage buildings and prepared fuel pumps for the busiest weekend of the month. Everything looked normal for about 5 minutes. Then 2 county deputy trucks appeared at the entrance and stopped side by side across the road. That changed everything. People slowed down immediately. Boat owners stepped out of their trucks. Marina employees stared at each other. A man carrying fishing rods actually stopped walking halfway across the parking lot and just stood there watching. Nobody understood what was happening. That included most of the HOA. Then a white Lexus SUV came flying around the corner and stopped hard beside the deputies. Evelyn Mercer jumped out holding a phone in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She looked like someone who had just discovered a fire in her living room. "You cannot do this," she snapped before she even reached the barricades. "This road serves the entire community." One deputy remained calm. The other simply pointed toward a stack of survey markers planted along the shoulder. Neither argued. Neither raised his voice. They did not need to. A crowd started gathering. Fast. That was when Evelyn finally noticed me standing beside an old fence line about 20 yards away. I was wearing jeans, work boots, and a faded denim shirt. In one hand, I held a folder thick enough to stop a door. In the other, a cup of coffee that was still warm. I had been there the whole time. Watching. Waiting. Evelyn marched straight toward me. "Tell them to move those barricades," she demanded. "You are disrupting access to private property." I took a sip of coffee before answering. "I agree." Her face brightened for a second. Then I finished the sentence. "Which is why nobody should be driving across mine." The expression on her face changed immediately. Around us, people started whispering. Some looked confused. Others looked nervous. One Marina member quietly asked another what I meant. "Good question." Evelyn pointed toward the lake. "That marina belongs to Harbor Ridge." "The marina does," I said. "The road does not." Silence hit the crowd like a wave. Not complete silence. The kind where dozens of people suddenly stop talking because they think they might have missed something important. Evelyn recovered quickly. She always did. "That road has been used by this community for years." "So has my land," I replied. "Does not make it theirs." One of the deputies stepped forward and opened a document folder. He reviewed a map, compared it to the survey stakes, then looked at Evelyn. His voice stayed professional. Calm. Matter of fact. "Ma'am, according to the recorded deed and current survey, this roadway is located on private property." Nobody cheered. Nobody gasped. Real life is usually quieter than movies. But I watched several people glance at Evelyn, then at the deputies, then back at me. For the first time all morning, she did not have an answer ready. That was the moment I knew the story was finally catching up with the truth. Because what nobody standing there understood yet was that this fight was never really about a marina. It was about a mistake buried in old documents, a promise somebody never had the right to make, and a road that should never have been treated like HOA property in the first place. Let me back up. And while I tell you how all of this started, I would genuinely like to know where you are watching from. Because people who have spent time around land, deeds, easements, lakes, ranches, farms, or property lines usually recognize these warning signs long before everyone else does. 6 months before deputies ever parked barricades across that marina road, I was standing on a ridge overlooking more land than I could comfortably see in a single afternoon. The property stretched across wooded hills, old logging trails, creek bottoms, and shoreline coves that wrapped around Kentucky Lake like pieces of a puzzle. Oak trees covered the higher ground. Deer moved through the timber at sunrise. Bald eagles occasionally circled over the water. It was the kind of place that made a man stop talking for a while. I needed that. The previous 3 years had been difficult. After my wife, Carol, passed away, I spent too much time sitting in a quiet house that suddenly felt much larger than it used to. Friends meant well. Family checked in often. But grief has a way of following you into every room. Some people travel. Some people move. I bought land. A lot of land. Not because I wanted to become wealthy. Not because I planned to develop it. Quite honestly, I was looking for somewhere life could slow down enough for me to hear myself think again. The first thing I loved about the property was what it did not have. No HOA meetings. No neighborhood committees. No architectural review boards telling grown adults what color their mailbox should be. No community newsletters warning people about lawn furniture. Just woods, water, wildlife, and silence. That sounded pretty good to me. The purchase took months to complete because land transactions of that size involve mountains of paperwork. Survey maps, tax parcel records, title reports, easement reviews, environmental documents, insurance requirements. Every page mattered. I knew that because I spent most of my career investigating insurance claims. One lesson stays with you after decades of that work. Small details become expensive details when people ignore them. Good paperwork saves trouble. Bad paperwork creates it. During closing, I reviewed stacks of documents thicker than some phone books. I checked property descriptions, parcel boundaries, access corridors, utility easements, recorded restrictions. Everything looked clean. At least it appeared that way. Looking back now, there was one detail I noticed but did not think much about at the time. A narrow road crossed part of the property near the eastern boundary. The title company listed it as a private roadway contained within the deed description. Nothing unusual there. Large properties often have old roads running through them. Logging roads, farm roads, utility roads. I made a mental note and moved on. That little road would eventually change everything. A few weeks after closing, I started exploring the property more thoroughly. Every morning, I loaded coffee into a travel mug, climbed into my truck, and spent hours driving trails, checking fences, and learning the land. The place felt endless. One day, I found an abandoned tobacco barn hidden among cedar trees. Another day, I discovered an old stone foundation from a farmhouse that had disappeared decades ago. Every turn revealed something new. Then I reached the eastern side of the property. That was different. The quiet disappeared. Traffic appeared. Golf carts rolled past. Luxury pickup trucks moved back and forth. Boat trailers rattled down the road toward the lake. The farther I drove, the stranger it became. Eventually, the road opened into a large marina complex filled with docks, slips, fuel pumps, storage buildings, and expensive boats lined up across the water. I sat there for a moment trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed something else. Everyone was using the road as if it belonged to them. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked permission. Nobody even looked around. The road functioned like community infrastructure. Yet according to the documents I had signed, it sat inside my property boundary. That did not automatically mean anyone was doing something wrong. Easements exist for good reasons. Shared access arrangements happen all the time. But years of investigating claims taught me another valuable lesson. Whenever reality and paperwork disagree, somebody should start asking questions. I had no idea then how important those questions would become. The first time I met Evelyn Mercer, she acted like she was welcoming a new neighbor. Looking back, I think she was actually checking whether I knew what I owned. The meeting happened about 3 weeks after I bought the property. I was standing near the eastern boundary studying a fence line that had not been repaired in years when a white SUV pulled onto the gravel shoulder and stopped beside me. A woman stepped out wearing a light blue blazer, sunglasses, and the kind of smile that looks practiced. Everything about her seemed polished. Even her clipboard looked expensive. She walked toward me with the confidence of someone accustomed to giving instructions. "You must be Warren Pike," she said. I nodded. "That is me." She extended her hand. "Evelyn Mercer, president of Harbor Ridge Estates." The name meant nothing to me at the time. That changed quickly. We talked for a few minutes about the weather, the lake, and the property. She complimented the land. She asked whether I planned to build anything. She asked whether I intended to develop the shoreline. All normal questions. At least they sounded normal. Then she glanced toward the road leading to the marina. I assumed the previous owner explained the access situation. There it was. The first hint. I asked what she meant. Evelyn smiled. "The marina road has always served the community." Always. Interesting word. I looked down the road. Golf carts moved back and forth. Pickup trucks pulled boat trailers toward the water. A fuel delivery truck was heading in the same direction. The traffic never stopped. Does the community own it? I asked. The question seemed simple enough. But instead of answering directly, she tilted her head slightly. "The road is essential to Harbor Ridge." That was not an answer. So I asked again, "Who owns it?" Her smile tightened for just a moment. Not long. Just enough for me to notice. Then she changed the subject. "Everyone depends on access to the marina." Another non-answer. Years of insurance investigations taught me something useful. Honest people usually answer direct questions directly. People avoiding answers often talk around them. Evelyn talked around everything. Before leaving, she handed me a welcome packet from Harbor Ridge. Inside were neighborhood maps, marina information, community guidelines, and brochures showing smiling residents enjoying lake life. The marina appeared everywhere. Photos of boats, photos of docks, photos of sunset gatherings. One thing stood out immediately. Every map showed the marina road as if it naturally belonged to the community. No explanation, no ownership information, just assumption. Assumptions can be dangerous. Over the next several days, I paid closer attention to what was happening near that road. The more I watched, the stranger things became. Harbor Ridge had installed decorative signs along portions of the route. Landscaping crews maintained areas beside the roadway. Security vehicles occasionally drove patrols through the corridor. Everything about their behavior suggested ownership. Yet none of it matched what I remembered seeing in my closing documents. One afternoon, I stopped at the Marina store and spoke with an older resident named Carl. He seemed friendly enough. We chatted about fishing conditions and water levels for a few minutes before I casually asked how long he had lived there. Almost 8 years, he said. Then he pointed toward the road. Best part of the place is easy marina access. I asked if he knew who owned the road. Carl laughed. The HOA, I guess. Guess. Not know. Guess. That caught my attention, because suddenly I realized something important. Most people were not relying on facts. They were relying on assumptions passed from one homeowner to the next. Somebody told somebody. Then that person told somebody else. After enough years, the story became accepted as truth. Real truth works differently. Real truth leaves paperwork behind. A few days later, I drove the entire length of the road again. This time I noticed a large sign near the marina entrance that read Harbor Ridge Marina members only. The sign stood on land that my survey appeared to include. I stopped the truck and looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at the property map sitting on the passenger seat beside me. Something was not adding up. And the more I looked, the more I started to believe Evelyn Mercer already knew that. The first real problem arrived about 10 days after my conversation with Evelyn. Up until then, everything had been questions and observations. I was watching, taking notes, comparing what people said against what the documents seemed to show. Then Harbor Ridge made a mistake. A very useful mistake. It started on a Tuesday morning when I drove toward the Marina Road to inspect a drainage ditch after a night of heavy rain. Water had washed debris across several low spots, and I wanted to make sure runoff was not damaging the property. About halfway down the road, a security vehicle pulled in front of my truck and stopped. At first, I thought there had been an accident. Then the driver stepped out. He wore a Harbor Ridge security shirt and carried a radio on his belt. "Morning," he said. "Where are you headed?" I pointed down the road. "Checking drainage." He nodded politely. Then he said something I will never forget. "This access road is restricted to Marina members." I honestly thought I misunderstood him. "Excuse me." He pointed toward the marina. "Members only beyond this point." I looked out the window. Then I looked back at him. Then I looked at the property map folded on my passenger seat. "You are telling me I cannot use a road that crosses my own land?" The poor guy suddenly looked uncomfortable. He was not trying to be difficult. He was simply repeating what somebody told him. "Sir, I am just following HOA policy." There it was. HOA policy. Not county law. Not property records. Not ownership documents. Policy. I thanked him, drove around the security vehicle, and continued toward the marina. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but it told me everything I needed to know. Somebody inside Harbor Ridge genuinely believed they controlled that road. That belief was about to become a problem. Later that afternoon, I returned to the entrance and noticed a new sign had appeared near the roadway. Harbor Ridge Marina members only. The sign stood beside professionally maintained landscaping, decorative stonework, and flower beds. It looked permanent. It looked expensive. It also appeared to be sitting inside my property boundary. I took photographs from several angles. Documentation matters. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. This time it came by certified mail. Inside the envelope was a formal letter from Harbor Ridge Estates. According to the document, my recently installed boundary markers were creating a safety concern for marina traffic and interfering with community access operations. The letter requested their removal. Requested. Interesting choice of words. I read the entire document twice. Not once did it explain why Harbor Ridge believed it had authority over the roadway. Not once did it provide a recorded easement. Not once did it reference ownership. The letter simply assumed control, as if control already existed. Assumptions again. I called the number listed at the bottom. Evelyn answered. Her tone sounded pleasant until I mentioned the letter. Then it changed immediately. Those markers create confusion, she said. They identify the property line, I replied. The community has used that road for years. I recognized the pattern instantly. Every answer returned to the same argument. Use. Dependence. Tradition. Community expectations. Never ownership. Never recorded rights. Never actual documentation. I asked a direct question. Can you send me the easement? Silence. A few seconds passed. Then she said, the board considers access settled. Settled. Another interesting word. Settled according to whom? I asked. She never answered. Instead, she ended the conversation and wished me a pleasant afternoon. That told me more than any argument could have. The next day, a county deputy arrived at the property after receiving a complaint that my survey markers were creating conflict with Marina traffic. The deputy was professional and courteous. He listened carefully while I explained the situation. Then he looked at the documents I had available and nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like a civil matter, he said. Best thing is to avoid making changes until ownership questions are sorted out. Fair advice. Sensible advice. Temporary advice. As the deputy drove away, I noticed something else. Evelyn was parked nearby watching the entire conversation from inside her SUV. When the deputy left, she smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough to suggest she believed she had won something. Maybe she thought the matter was finished. Maybe she thought I would get frustrated and walk away. What she did not know was that years of investigating insurance claims taught me a simple lesson. When somebody becomes nervous about property lines, the next thing you do is pull every piece of paperwork you can find. And that was exactly what I planned to do. The deeper I looked into the situation, the more I realized the road was not the real story. The marina was. At first glance, it looked like a beautiful lakefront amenity. Floating docks stretched across a protected cove. Fuel pumps stood near the main pier. Boat slips lined both sides of the basin. Maintenance sheds, storage buildings, and parking areas filled the shoreline. On summer weekends, the place buzzed with activity from sunrise until dark. People loved it. That was the problem. The entire operation depended on one road. Every boat trailer, every fuel truck, every maintenance vehicle, every contractor, every homeowner, everything passed through the same access corridor crossing my property. Once I noticed that, I started paying closer attention. For several weeks, I visited different parts of the marina at different times of day. Early mornings, midday, evenings, weekdays, weekends. Patterns started appearing. A landscaping crew arrived every Tuesday. Fuel deliveries happened twice a month. Marine mechanics used service vans almost daily. Dock contractors occasionally brought large equipment trailers through the road. The amount of traffic was far greater than most people would imagine. This was not a small neighborhood dock. It was a business operation hiding inside a residential community. That raised the stakes. One Saturday morning, I stopped at the Marina store and bought a cup of coffee. The man working behind the counter looked to be about my age. Friendly face. Easy smile. We started talking about fishing conditions and lake levels. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward the marina itself. Busy place, I said. He laughed. Busiest marina on this side of the lake. Then he pointed toward the road. Access is everything. I asked what he meant. Without that road, none of this works. Simple answer. Honest answer. The kind of answer people give when they are not trying to hide anything. As the weeks passed, I met more residents. Most were good people. Retired teachers. Veterans. Small business owners. Families who saved for years to buy lake property. Several invited me to sit and talk while they cleaned boats or watched sunsets from the docks. Their stories sounded remarkably similar. Many purchased homes specifically because the marina access was advertised as a major feature of the community. One resident named Bill told me he paid significantly more for his property because of the convenience. Another homeowner explained that the marina was the main reason they chose Harbor Ridge instead of other developments nearby. The more people I spoke with, the more uncomfortable I became, because nobody seemed aware there might be a problem. Not one person. They all assumed the road belonged to Harbor Ridge. Not because they had seen documents. Because they had been told that was the case. Assumptions again. Then something happened that changed my perspective completely. One afternoon, I was standing near the shoreline speaking with an older Marina member named Roger. He pointed toward a large building near the fuel dock. "That expansion project cost a fortune," he said. Then he pointed toward a newer dock section. "So did that." Then another structure. Then another. By the end of the conversation, I realized millions of dollars had been invested in facilities relying on the same access road. Millions. Suddenly, the issue stopped looking like a simple property dispute. It started looking like a financial time bomb. That evening, I returned home and pulled out every document from my closing package again. I spread maps across the dining room table and traced the roadway with my finger. Then I highlighted nearby parcel boundaries. Then I reviewed title exceptions and easement schedules one more time. Something still felt wrong. The next morning, I called the title company that handled my purchase. The representative was helpful and professional. After reviewing my file, she said something that immediately caught my attention. The title commitment did not identify a recorded marina access easement affecting that roadway. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Slowly, carefully. Recorded marina access easement. Not identified. That sentence stayed in my head for the rest of the day. Because if the marina truly depended on that road, and the road crossed private property, and no recorded easement appeared in the title review, then somebody somewhere had made a very expensive assumption. I still did not know who. But for the first time, since buying the land, I started to suspect that Harbor Ridge was not protecting a legal right. They might be protecting a mistake. The next step was simple. Stop guessing and start digging. If there was a legal right allowing Harbor Ridge to use that road, I wanted to find it. If there was not, I wanted to know that too. Either way, the answer would not come from conversations in parking lots or HOA newsletters. It would come from records. Real records. A week later, I drove to the county courthouse carrying a notebook, a folder full of closing documents, and enough coffee to get through a long day. The courthouse sat on a hill overlooking the town square, the kind of building that had seen generations of property disputes come and go. Inside, the records office smelled like old paper and air conditioning. I have always liked places like that. Truth tends to leave a paper trail. The woman behind the records counter introduced herself as Linda Carver. She had worked there for more than 20 years and seemed to know every parcel in the county by memory. I explained what I was trying to understand. She listened carefully, then started pulling maps, plats, deeds, easement records, and archive filings from several different databases. Within 30 minutes, the story became much more interesting. The original marina developer had not built the project all at once. Construction happened in phases. Roads were added gradually. Docks expanded over time. Storage facilities appeared later. Each stage generated paperwork. Lots of paperwork. We reviewed document after document. Most of it looked ordinary. Then we found the first surprise. About 11 years earlier, the developer had submitted plans for a permanent access easement crossing what was then neighboring property. The application existed. The survey existed. Even the proposed legal description existed. One thing did not. The completed easement. The file simply stopped. No recorded approval. No signed agreement. No final filing. It was like watching a bridge and halfway across a river. Something happened. The question was what? Linda noticed my expression and nodded. "That is unusual," she said. I agreed. Very unusual. The next document raised even more questions. It showed that a temporary construction access agreement had once existed during marina expansion work. Temporary. Not permanent. Temporary. The agreement allowed contractors and equipment to use the road while certain improvements were completed. The expiration date sat clearly on the final page. 9 years earlier. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I asked Linda whether any replacement agreement appeared afterward. She searched again. Nothing. She checked the second system. Nothing. She checked archived indexes. Still nothing. That got my attention. By late afternoon, I had enough information to justify hiring a surveyor. Not just any surveyor. I wanted someone who specialized in large rural properties and complicated access questions. 2 days later, I met Glenn Rourke. Glenn was one of those people who could look at a boundary map for 30 seconds and spot problems most folks would miss for years. He reviewed my documents, listened to the story, and agreed to conduct a complete boundary review of the roadway. The work took several days. Survey equipment appeared along the corridor. Bright orange stakes marked property lines. GPS measurements verified historical records. Every afternoon, Glenn updated me on what he was finding. Each conversation made the situation harder for Harbor Ridge to explain. Then came the final report. Glenn spread a large map across my dining room table and traced the road with his finger. "The entire corridor falls inside your parcel boundaries," he said. "Not part of it. All of it." I asked the question that had been bothering me for weeks. "What about a recorded easement?" Glenn shook his head. "I cannot find one." Those 4 words changed everything. The following day, I contacted a title attorney named Mara Ellison and sent her every document we had collected. She reviewed the file for nearly a week before calling me back. Her first sentence was one I will never forget. "Warren, they do not have a road problem." I waited. Then she finished the thought. "They have a disclosure problem." I asked her what she meant. Mara explained that if residents, lenders, insurers, and buyers had been led to believe permanent legal access existed when no recorded easement could be found, the issue extended far beyond a simple property dispute. Suddenly, all those conversations with homeowners started making sense. The confidence, the assumptions, the certainty. People believed something because somebody had been telling the same story for years. But stories and records are not the same thing. As I sat at the table looking over maps, surveys, and title documents, I realized the road itself was no longer the biggest question. The bigger question was who knew about the missing easement and how long they had known it. And for the first time, I started to suspect Evelyn Mercer might already know the answer. After my conversation with Mara Ellison, I stopped asking whether Harbor Ridge had a problem. The documents had already answered that question. What I needed to know now was how deep the problem went and who knew about it. That is a very different investigation. For the next several weeks, I treated the situation the same way I handled complicated insurance claims during my career. Slow down. Verify everything. Trust documents more than opinions. The truth usually reveals itself if you give it enough room. Mara sent formal records requests to several parties connected to the Marina's history. Some responses arrived quickly. Others took longer. Meanwhile, I continued living my normal routine. Every morning, I checked fences, watched deer move through the timber, and drank coffee overlooking the lake. On the surface, life remained peaceful. Underneath, the paperwork was getting louder. One afternoon, Mara called and asked if I could meet her at her office. Her tone told me she had found something important. When I arrived, several documents sat arranged across a conference table. Emails, financial reports, development records, marina planning materials. None of them looked dramatic. Most major problems never do. Mara pointed toward a section of an appraisal package completed years earlier when the marina refinanced part of its operation. The facility had been valued at several $1,000,000. Boat slips, storage facilities, fuel services, future revenue, projections. Everything appeared professional. Then she pointed to one sentence. Permanent private access road serving marina facilities. I read it twice. Then a third time. Where did they get that? I asked. Mara leaned back in her chair. That is the interesting question. Because despite hundreds of pages of supporting documents, nobody had attached a recorded easement proving permanent access. The statement existed. The proof did not. That bothered me. A lot. A few days later, another document surfaced from an older planning archive. This one involved discussions among people connected to the marina expansion project years earlier. Most of the conversation focused on construction schedules, contractor issues, and permitting concerns. Then one message caught everyone's attention. A former treasurer had written a warning. The wording was simple. We never finalized recorded access after the developer's sale. That sentence changed the room. Mara read it aloud. Then she handed me the next page. The response came from Evelyn Mercer. I recognized her name immediately. The message was brief. Do not create panic over paperwork. I sat quietly for several seconds. Not because the message proved wrongdoing. It did not. But it proved awareness. Somebody had raised the issue. Somebody had recognized the risk. And instead of solving it, they appeared to push it aside. That was different. Very different. Suddenly, all those conversations from earlier months started fitting together. The vague answers. The refusal to provide easement records. The constant references to community expectations instead of ownership. It was beginning to look less like confusion and more like avoidance. Still, I was not interested in creating chaos. Most Harbor Ridge residents had done nothing wrong. They bought homes. They trusted information provided during sales. They paid dues. They used amenities. Many were just as unaware as I had been. They deserved fairness. So Mara and I decided to take the most reasonable path possible. We sent a formal certified notice to Harbor Ridge. The letter explained the survey findings. It summarized the title review. It requested documentation supporting any claimed access rights. Most importantly, it offered time. 45 days. Plenty of time. The letter invited discussion, mediation, negotiation, and review of any records we might have missed. It was not a threat. It was an opportunity. A fair one. Harbor Ridge received the notice 3 days later. We confirmed delivery. Then we waited. The first week passed without a response. Then the second. Then the third. During that period, I noticed something interesting. Survey stakes near the road began disappearing. New landscaping appeared around certain areas. Several signs were repositioned. Nothing major. Just enough activity to suggest somebody was paying very close attention. Then Harbor Ridge finally responded. Not with easement records. Not with title documents. Not with proof of ownership. Instead, their attorney sent a letter arguing that community reliance and historical use should be considered. I read the letter twice. Then I looked at Mara. She smiled slightly. Notice what is missing? She asked. I already had. No recorded easement. No signed agreement. No ownership documentation. Just arguments. Lots of arguments. That was the moment I realized the end of the story was approaching. Because when people stop producing records and start producing excuses, the paperwork has usually already won. Harbor Ridge still had time to solve the problem. They could negotiate. They could seek a lawful agreement. They could tell residents the truth. But they chose something else. They chose to pretend the road issue would disappear if they ignored it long enough. Big mistake. Because Lake Festival weekend was only a few weeks away, and the busiest day of the year was about to collide with the strongest evidence we had found yet. Lake Festival weekend arrived with perfect weather, which somehow made everything feel worse. The sky was clear. The water looked like glass. Boats filled the coves before sunrise. Harbor Ridge had advertised the event for months. Residents invited friends. Marina members planned fishing trips. Local vendors prepared for one of the busiest weekends of the year. Nobody expected a legal reality check at 7 o'clock in the morning. I arrived before most of the crowd. Survey stakes still marked portions of the corridor. Copies of the survey, title review, certified notices, and attorney correspondence sat neatly inside a folder on the passenger seat of my truck. Mara had already reviewed everything one final time. Glenn had verified the boundaries again. Nothing was being rushed. Nothing was being improvised. That mattered. A few minutes later, 2 county deputies arrived for a civil standby. Their job was simple. Keep the peace. Verify documents. Make sure nobody created problems while a property owner exercised his legal rights. Professional. Calm. Routine. Real life usually looks like paperwork. Then the traffic started. Boat trailers rolled toward the marina. Golf carts appeared from every direction. Residents waved at neighbors. Families carried folding chairs and coolers. For a brief moment, it looked like every other Lake Festival morning. Then the barricades went up. Everything stopped. Confusion spread first. Then curiosity. People stepped out of vehicles trying to understand why deputies were standing across the entrance road. Conversations started immediately. Questions bounced from one group to another. Nobody seemed angry yet. Mostly confused. Then Evelyn Mercer arrived. Her white SUV turned into the entrance so quickly that gravel sprayed behind the tires. She stepped out holding a phone and a clipboard, already talking before the vehicle door fully closed. "What is going on?" she demanded. One deputy explained that access through the corridor was being restricted pending private property enforcement and recorded ownership verification. Evelyn pointed directly at me. "This is ridiculous." I remained where I was. Calm. That bothered her more than any argument could have. She marched across the gravel shoulder and stopped a few feet away. "You cannot shut down our marina." I took a sip of coffee. "I am not shutting down your marina." She crossed her arms. "Then move the barricades." "The marina is yours," I said. "The road is not." Several nearby residents heard every word. Silence followed. The good kind. The kind where people start paying attention. Evelyn immediately shifted into presentation mode. I had seen it before. She spoke confidently about community reliance, years of access, neighborhood expectations, property values, tradition. Shared use. Every familiar argument returned. What never appeared was a recorded easement. Not once. One deputy finally asked a simple question. Ma'am, do you have documentation showing ownership or permanent recorded access rights? Evelyn hesitated, just for a second, but everyone saw it. Then she said the board attorney was handling those matters. The deputy nodded politely. Do you have the documents today? She did not answer. That answer spoke loudly. By then a sizable crowd had gathered. Marina members, homeowners, contractors, boat owners, people who had spent years assuming the situation was settled. A retired homeowner named Bill stepped forward. I recognized him from earlier conversations. Evelyn, he said carefully, is there actually an easement? The question hung in the air. Nobody interrupted. Nobody joked. Nobody moved. Everyone waited. Evelyn looked toward the marina, then toward the crowd, then toward the deputies. Finally, she said something that changed the entire atmosphere. We have always had access. Bill nodded slowly. That is not what I asked. More silence. A boat owner standing behind him spoke next. If the road was never secured, why were we told it was permanent? Another question. Then another. Then another. Suddenly the crowd was no longer looking at me. They were looking at Evelyn. The focus had shifted completely. Mara arrived a few minutes later carrying additional copies of the survey and title review. She handed them to interested residents. Nobody had to make speeches. Nobody had to create drama. People simply started reading. Maps, dates, property descriptions, easement searches, certified notices. Facts have a funny way of changing conversations. The most important moment came when one deputy reviewed the survey one final time and addressed the crowd. His voice remained calm and professional. Based on the documents provided and available county records, this roadway appears to be private property. Any permanent access questions will need to be resolved through proper legal agreements. That was it. No shouting. No handcuffs. No movie scene. Just facts. Real facts. The crowd slowly absorbed what they had heard. Some people looked frustrated. Others looked disappointed. Several looked stunned. But for the first time since I bought the property, everyone was operating from the same reality. The story Harbor Ridge had relied on for years was finally colliding with the paperwork. And paperwork was winning. The weeks after Lake Festival were surprisingly quiet. Not because the problem disappeared. Quite the opposite. The truth had finally surfaced, and now everyone had to decide what to do with it. Harbor Ridge homeowners started asking questions at board meetings. Residents requested copies of records. Several people hired their own attorneys to review purchase documents and marina disclosures. For the first time in years, assumptions were being replaced by paperwork. That changes people. The board could no longer rely on vague explanations. The surveys existed. The title reviews existed. The county records existed. Every major fact was now sitting in front of the community. Anyone willing to read could see the same thing. The road crossed private property. No recorded permanent easement had been found. The situation required a real solution, not another speech. Within a month, Harbor Ridge hired outside legal counsel and engineering consultants. Alternative access routes were studied. Cost estimates were prepared. Several options turned out to be expensive. One turned out to be very expensive. That surprised nobody. Infrastructure mistakes often become costly years after they are made. Meanwhile, residents continued reaching out to me. Some apologized for assumptions they had made earlier. Others simply wanted information. A retired school principal named Bill stopped by one afternoon and sat with me on the porch overlooking the lake. We talked for nearly an hour. Before leaving, he shook his head and said something I still remember. Most of us never thought to ask for proof. We just trusted the story. I understood exactly what he meant. People are busy. They buy homes. They raise families. They plan retirement. Most do not spend weekends researching easements and title records. That is normal. The problem begins when leaders stop checking too. A few weeks later, another major change arrived. Evelyn Mercer resigned as HOA president. There was no dramatic announcement. No emotional speech. No public confrontation. One board meeting she was there. The next she was not. New board members took over and immediately began discussing long-term access solutions. In fairness to them, they handled the situation much better than their predecessors. They focused on facts. They focused on records. Most importantly, they focused on solving the problem instead of pretending it did not exist. Progress finally started moving. Harbor Ridge eventually approved construction of a new access route entirely within property they controlled. Engineers designed it. Surveyors mapped it. Contractors built it. The process took time, money, and patience. Real solutions usually do. During that transition period, Mara helped draft a temporary written agreement allowing limited emergency access across the existing corridor under specific conditions. Everything was documented. Every responsibility was spelled out. Every term was clear. No assumptions. No confusion. Just paperwork. Exactly how it should have been from the beginning. The day the new road officially opened, I drove out to the old Marina corridor just before sunset. The traffic was gone. The constant stream of trailers and service vehicles had moved elsewhere. For the first time since I bought the property, the road felt like part of the land again. Quiet. Simple. Ordinary. I parked near one of the original survey markers and stood there for a while looking across the lake. The water reflected the evening sky. Birds moved through the trees. Wind rustled across the shoreline. It reminded me why I bought the property in the first place. Peace. That was all I ever wanted. Before leaving, I installed a simple sign near the entrance. Nothing dramatic. Just a few words. Private road. Written permission required. Then I climbed back into the truck and headed home. Looking back now, I do not consider the story a victory over a marina or an HOA. The real lesson was much bigger than that. Property rights matter. Documentation matters. Calm persistence matters. Most of all, understanding what you own matters. Because ownership is not determined by who uses something the longest. It is not determined by who speaks the loudest at meetings. It is not determined by how many people repeat the same story. Ownership is determined by records, surveys, deeds, and agreements that can actually be verified. If there is one thing this experience taught me, it is that every property owner should learn the basics of easements, title records, and boundary lines before trouble starts, not after. And if you ever find yourself facing somebody who insists they have authority over your land, do not panic. Do not argue. Do not guess. Pull the documents. Read the records. Verify the facts. Because paperwork has a funny way of making very confident people suddenly become very quiet.